the greatest man-made disaster in decades. Shattered homes and broken lives.
For 20 years, this was our life, but it was taken away in a moment.
The total loss of an entire region and hopelessness for many years.
We have lost this region as it was.
The invasive methods of the Russian army bring disasters and catastrophes to Ukraine.
This house is even lower. You can't even see the entrance, and the windows are completely sunken.
And impunity leads to new criminal acts.
The loss of Dnipro reservoir will create a collapse.
About the large-scale consequences of the cynical Russian terrorist attack, the blow of the Kakhovka HPP, and about new threats, see in the special report Kakhovka Desert, 1 year since the man-made ecological disaster. Objects for manipulations and provocation, tools of blackmail and terror, the Russian army being on Ukrainian land since February 2022 focused on capturing not only towns and villages, but strategic and critical infrastructure, making them as an element of deterrence and as a revenge for its military defeats.
Like most of our employees, we woke up from the explosions. Despite the shelling, I and a part of the staff went to the station in the morning to ensure its operation. At about 10:40 this day, a large amount of Russian military equipment was already approaching the station. Being armed, they entered the station. The staff from the station was withdrawn by the military. Armed units occupied all the station buildings. On the Kakhovka Lock, they set their flag. This is how the occupation started.
The Russians organized a real terror at the seized Kakhovka HPP. Their actions included suspending Ukrainian workers, putting their managers in charge, stealing important documents and mining the station.
People were under pressure all the time. It was impossible to go anywhere. The operational staff were the first to be attacked. They were under the control of the occupiers for 24 hours. They treated us when we had system outages or something else. They intimidated people, saying that it was done deliberately. They stole everything, including batteries, kettles and laptops. All the equipment was taken from the turbine hydraulic workshop, electrical workshop and computer technology workshop. Devices that could be used to adjust speed control systems, line protection. This is very valuable special equipment. Putting all this on tanks, on armored vehicles, they went somewhere. There was no access to anywhere. We couldn't see anything. We had information from station workers who were at the plant until the end of September. They observed the importation and lowering of explosives into the lower sections of the station by Russian troops.
All this was done for frightening the Ukrainian authorities and people and to blackmail the Western countries. After all, Putin's military got a ticking bomb at its command. During wars and conflicts, international law prohibits the seizure and destruction of dams and facilities that supply drinking water. This is exactly what happened on June 6, 2023, due to the fault of the Russian military. These are the consequences of blowing up the Kakhovka Hydroelectric power plant and destroying its reservoir, the largest in Ukraine. 18 million cubic meters of fresh water flooded more than 80 settlements, including residential houses, nature reserves and national parks.
This is the largest environmental disaster caused by humans in a century. This is in Hulets. At about 6:20, the water started to rise in the river. It was halfway up the vegetable garden, rising very intensively. At 10, the water was already under the foundation.
Natalia is from the village of Sadovo in the Kherson region. Her childhood and youth passed here. Her parents built this house back in 1989 with their own hands.
We have built something, bought equipment and furniture, just lived. We had everything in the houses, absolutely everything. There are new repairs everywhere, all new modern equipment.
After the Russian military blew up the Kakhovka Hydroelectric power station and seething streams gushed into the settlements, Natalia's house flooded, water reached the attic.
The water was up to 6 or 7 meters. We were coming up with boats and I was looking through the windows, looking what was going on up there in the attic. I thought it was dry, but it was nothing like that. Everything was floating up there. The water was up to the window, just so you understand.
A week later, the water drained away. The house was left in ruins.
We already cleaned up the yard and almost a new door was broken. Everything was up to the ceiling because of the water. That's how all the furniture that was standing just fell down. The stretch ceilings, like everything in the house, fell down. A lot of things we threw away. I don't know what can be repaired among household appliances. A lot of things were in clay and smelled bad. There was nothing left in the vegetable garden, neither fruits nor vegetables.
After a year, Natalia managed only to dismantle the remnants of the property, take out the garbage and prepare for repair. It is necessary to build the house from scratch.
We will rebuild our house. There's only a box left. The windows need to be changed and the floor. The floor has already sagged. It will have to be filled and the walls will need repair. This is my house. I don't know how to live in it, what to do, or where to begin.
Galina and Mikola lived in Kherson on June 6, 2023. Her family was awakened by a phone call and Abba informed them that the HPP was blown up and advised them to evacuate immediately. The family took necessary things for a couple of days and left the house. When they returned, half of the house was gone, it was washed away.
It was still impossible to get through there. We discovered this on June the 8th. The wall fell. This wall, there's a beam across the whole house. It will pull that side too.
It is not possible to rebuild the house. The family moved into temporary housing.
We will live somehow. The so-called brothers liberated us. Now we are free. They are still shooting. They shot today. People are already cleaning up and they are shooting again. They didn't drown us, so want to hit.
Until 12, there was no water. We walked just observing the situation. In one moment, water ran from the weather station. It ran from the weather station through the yard, flooded there, and followed the same path here. When we left the house with the dogs on our shoulders, the water was so high that it was up to our waist.
Natalia and Viktor Kovalyov lived in Kherson. They were 78 kilometers from the epicenter of the explosion. The couple didn't believe until the last moment that the water would reach them. In order to keep out the large water, they placed bags of sand around the house.
The current was so strong. We decided to block doors with sand. We thought that water wouldn't get into our yard, but we were wrong.
The situation was more or less under control until 12 p.m. It was coming slowly, and after about 1 p.m. began to rise sharply, literally 10, 15, 20.
Towards noon, the water was also in Kherson. The flow came down with high speed, flooding residential streets. The Kovalyov family had to evacuate in a matter of minutes. They took only their documents and animals. On the morning of the next day, the house was underwater.
When we got out, we saw only our roof, just roof. Understand? It was higher than this. I mean, there was 10 centimeters of water in the attic.
In fact, there were 2 stripes. You can see these 2 stripes.
After a few days, when the water was gone, the house was ruined.
When we opened the door, we saw that the house was like a football field. All these bulkheads were in clay. Everyone fell in. Fortunately, the walls were not ruined. These walls, the walls and a roof.
Furniture like this, dishes like this, clothes, everything like this, like in a mixer.
During a year of non-stop hard work, the couple managed to put their house in order. They did cosmetic repairs inside and cleaned the yard.
Now it's like an alignment compared to what it was. It's completely different because the house is being rebuilt.
Our house has a look of real home, you know? It was just awful.
Ukrainian law enforcers and Ukraine's Western partners called the blowing of the Kakhovka Hydroelectric power plant a terrorist act. As a result, hundreds of houses were destroyed and the fates of thousands of civilians in the region were broken. 32 people are dead and 39 are currently missing. There is no information about dozens of people living in the occupation on the left bank of the Kherson region. The Russians did not even make an effort to save them. The Russian military provoked a real ecocide. The ruins are visible consequences of the flooding. For almost 70 years, the Kakhovka HPP not only regulated the flow of the Dnipro River, but also supplied water and electricity to the south of Ukraine. From Kherson to Crimea, water was used both for household needs and for irrigation. The agricultural industry suffered significant losses as a result of the destruction of the hydroelectric power plant and reservoir.
The Kherson region, as a part of the south of Ukraine, was crucial for the agricultural sector, particularly in terms of vegetable production. It is the largest area for vegetable yields, over 12%. Kherson's yield is 40% higher than the average result all across Ukraine.
The reservoir was used to irrigate more than 1 million hectares of land, both for ordinary households and for large agricultural enterprises.
Due to the undermining of the Kakhovka HPP and the actual destruction of irrigation systems and drainage of the southern and central regions, in particular Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk and of course in Kherson, the region lost about 14% of the entire grain and legume harvest, which is the main export crop for Ukraine.
The destruction of the Kakhovka HPP and Kakhovka reservoir caused the loss of over $180 billion in direct losses of the agricultural sector, including the loss of crops for export.
We cannot grow that amount of crops we used to receive, both for Ukraine and for supplies abroad. We don't even have enough water to irrigate our fields.
We could lose markets in the face of declining agricultural production and lose our role in the global food security in general.
Without the Kakhovka reservoir, it is impossible to restore irrigation systems. There is barely enough water for human needs. Farmers are forced to grow easy to irrigate crops. This will have a long-term negative impact on both the yield and the soil composition.
In future, plants that require less water should be our next choice. But at the same time, we will have less opportunity to use crop rotation and our land will be increasingly depleted. This will lead to reduced returns in the long run.
In the Dnipropetrovsk region, people use water from boreholes, but it is not suitable for irrigation of fields.
We conducted our expeditions in autumn and in spring in Nikopol and in Marhanets districts, communicating with local residents who keep greenhouses. They had no choice but to dig small boreholes, and nowadays they use water with high salinity to water their land. Water with a high chloride content, which reaches 50 to 60 milligrams per liter. And chlorides for soil are poisons, which inhibit further plant growth and useful properties of soil. In a few years, probably 5 to 7, they actually reduce soil fertility by at least 40%, and that's already the impact of ecocide.
The undermining of the hydroelectric power plant endangered the drinking water supply of more than 2 million people.
And this is the biggest trouble right now. These consequences will only worsen in the future. The loss of the Kakhovka reservoir as a reliable reserve and main source of drinking water, fresh water in the region, has a direct impact on the population. It was a huge reservoir of fresh water, a freshwater storage bank for all southern regions of Ukraine, including Dnipropetrovsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and even partially Donetsk region and the Autonomous Republic of Crimea.
Ukrainian authorities are trying to solve the problem by building technical water pipelines.
Each such water pipeline requires a huge amount of electricity, which is now scarce and in short supply. This increases the cost of water when it will eventually become simply golden. What is the humanitarian component of this problem? People and industry need fresh water. Now there is no fresh water reserve in the region, and the people have nowhere to go. Speaking about the Nikopol community, the population has decreased to about 200,000, and these people have the need of drinking water, and it is necessary to ensure their need for water at least somehow.
But the water in the region is no longer usable.
All toxic substances enter the human body through the food. In the human body, toxic substances accumulate and do not go anywhere. Destroyed ecosystems affect our lives, our air, our water, our land. Everything that gets into the human body accumulates and affects the cardiovascular system, the liver, the kidneys, the immune system. In fact, our safe consumption of water and food from this region and the regions that have suffered and been polluted affects our health completely negatively. The question is, how long are the people in these areas going to live? What will be the lifespan of the next generation?
To cope with the problem without filling the Kakhovka reservoir, technological solutions or resettlement of the region's residents are needed.
If we do not restore a reliable supply of fresh water, we have only two ways. Either find a solution to desalinate local water, which is very expensive, or we should significantly reduce the number of people in these territories. And when I talk about a significant reduction, it is a reduction of at least in half.
The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was also left without water.
Kakhovka water reservoir is the place where heat from condensers of all turbines of NPP power units was discharged. It is a very important part of the technological cycle, and without it the operation of Zaporizhzhia NPP at the power of 6,000 megawatts is impossible.
The water reservoir has disappeared, and now there is a cooling pond where the water level is decreasing. It is now obvious that it is impossible to cool the operating reactors.
The huge water reservoir got shallow despite the fact that Zaporizhzhia MPP operates in a maintenance mode. Water is necessary for powering the station, turbine condensers and safety systems. The level in the cooling basin has fallen over the year. This means new risks.
The Kakhovka reservoir backed up the water that is located in the cooling pool of the Zaporizhzhia NPP. For all this time, in fact, the level in this cooling basin is decreasing. The level today is 15.3 meters. When the dam was blown up, the level was 16.7. It has already drained by more than a meter over this period. If the process continues, in 2 years this cooling basin will reach the critical level, and then there will be no water at all for Zaporizhzhia NPP and for cooling of safety systems.
The Kremlin ignores the risks, claiming a possible restart of Zaporizhzhia MPP.
No matter how difficult it is, we ensure the safe operation of the station. As the situation develops, we will look for options, for opportunities to transfer this facility to the category of acting one. Alexey Likhachov, Director General of Rosatom.
If Rosatom, the state nuclear corporation of Russia, attempts to restart and actually is successful in restarting one or more nuclear reactors, that will dramatically increase the risk of a severe radiation event, potentially much worse than Fukushima.
The boreholes dug by Russians to maintain water levels and refill the cooling pool won't help either.
They made boreholes, but the level in the cooling pool is constantly falling.
The Rosatom, which now operates the plant, doesn't produce electricity. It has made wells deeper than 20 meters so that it will be additional groundwater recharge for cooling needs as the situation develops. Although the situation remains risky. When the reservoir disappeared, backed up the water disappeared, this pressure disappeared, the groundwater level is falling.
Dramatically increase the possibility, the probability of a major nuclear disaster.
The Kremlin has never admitted its involvement in the terrorist act with serious consequences for people and the environment. The Russian dictator blamed Ukraine for everything.
Кто виновен, понятно.
Well, it is clear who is to blame. The Ukrainian side was striving for this. They purposely hit the Kakhovka HPP many times with HIMARS. That's the point. Maybe they had some kind of detonation there. I don't know. Maybe they installed something which caused the destroying. As you realize, we are definitely not interested in this.
The Kremlin's henchmen followed the same methodology. They supported the dictator.
If over time a large number of blows with the HIMARS, which they themselves stated, when you hammer and hammer in something that is working with high voltage all the time, at some point it will simply collapse.
But when they were figuring out who was guilty, Russians almost turned on themselves.
Blowing up that dam, for sure, it's not that easy. No shell. You need a lot of explosives. It wasn't an external explosion. Something flew over and destroyed the station. It was done for such a direct impact.
Look, the dam was constructed for atomic warfare. What external impact do you mean?
Russian propaganda may fabricate the fable, but satellite images and hydrological calculations confirm Russia's involvement.
Hydroelectric dams are built with a safety margin of at least 100 years. Given that the Kakhovka HPP was built in the 1950s, the minimum lifetime should have ended after 2050. The second factor, the destruction, is proven to be of such magnitude that it is now already possible to estimate, even taking into account remote sensing. Using satellite images, they indicate where it was, where the explosives were installed, and how much of them there were, in what place the detonation took place, and accordingly, the devastating consequences as a result of this detonation. So it seems to me that it is obvious that it was done by the Russians.
Compared to our measurements, we observed that there was significantly more water flowing from the reservoir than we thought. This was also evident in the change in Kherson. There is only one scientific explanation for that. It means that the magnitude of this breakthrough has increased. This means that the water has completely washed the soil below the dam. No airstrike can achieve that. The calculation indicates that the explosion was caused by explosives installed across the entire dam's foundation.
The involvement of the Kremlin in the explosion is also evidenced by the intercepted Russian conversations.
They did very bad to themselves.
We did it, not them.
Really? We? It is said it was the Ukrainian side.
They didn't hit it. It was our sabotage group. Our guys wanted to blackmail with that dam. Moreover, the situation didn't go according to plan. This was staged by the Russians in order to prevent our counteroffensive, in order to create additional water obstacles for these purposes.
Ukraine has already appealed to the International Criminal Court regarding the blowing of the Kakhovka HPP. The European Union officially recognized the attack as a war crime by Russia.
International experts absolutely agree with our experts that it was a disaster, that it was extremely dangerous. The United Nations program, the environmental unit of the United Nations, has carried out what is called a rapid impact assessment. They estimated both economic and environmental damage. This is a very rough estimate, about $11.2 billion, and more than 6 billion are environmental losses. Interesting is that only losses of protected areas and forests were included in this assessment. There is criminal liability for those who committed this catastrophe, who gave orders. They must be brought to court and tried there either under international law or ours.
The explosion at the hydroelectric power plant and the reservoir's destruction caused a shock to the entire world. Except Russia, the threat is still present. Putin's military is attacking critical infrastructure, including Dnipro hydroelectric plant in Zaporizhia.
There is a constant attack. More than 100 rockets have been fired at the hydroelectric power station. Did you see what the consequences were for the Dnipro HPP? The station is almost destroyed. This is the largest station with 1,500 megawatts in power, the largest hydroelectric power station in Europe, and the enemy hits the fleets, hits the station.
After the attack in late March 2024, the Dnipro HPP was taken out of service indefinitely.
The The occupiers are using the hydraulic infrastructure in the combat zone for military purposes. By detonating a dam in this way, they create water obstacles for the advance of our troops and for conducting offensive operations. In the active combat zone, we see that a large number of hydraulic structures, including ponds, are destroyed, and this practice is continuing. The infrastructure is being intentionally destroyed by the Russians.
Hydrologists assure that it is technically impossible to damage the Dnipro hydropower plant by airstrikes, but they predict different scenarios.
Hydraulic engineers say that it is impossible to inflict such massive destruction to that size due to airstrikes. It is very difficult. We have made a calculation repeating the scenario of 1941. Using photographs, we have reconstructed the size of the hole that was there and calculated what happened. The situation now that we have, it is close to the situation of 1941 before the reservoir. We have calculated that this wave will pass from top to bottom, but the effect will be lower than with Kakhovka Dam.
If Russians succeed in damaging the Dnipro HPP, the consequences will be enormous.
Any airstrikes, including on dams, which are specially protected structures, can cause partial damage. However, these problems are solved. We have seen it when the Russians want to repeat the acts of ecocide and terrorism on the Dnipro hydropower plant, where some crane beams were damaged, and there were attempts to damage the seam of the banks of the Dnipro hydropower plant. But the fact is that this system can withstand such attacks.
It will take several years to restore the Kakhovka reservoir. The reconstruction of the hydroelectric power plant will cost almost 2 billion euros. But first, Russian troops must leave Ukrainian territory. Disregarding the rules of warfare, committing a terrorist attack that resulted in a humanitarian catastrophe, and ecocide, these are the methods of the Kremlin and its army. Ukrainians are deprived of the conditions of forced survival by Putin's soldiers, and Russians bring new threats, making not only people, but also the environment the victims of war. Marina Nestorova, Daria Litovchenko, Special Report.